This is the Accessibility Supports training module for Oregon's statewide assessment system, required for all district and school test coordinators, as well as test administrators. This training is designed to provide an overview of Oregon's statewide assessment accessibility supports. Resources that support the selection, administration, and evaluation of these supports is also discussed. The Oregon Accessibility Manual, or OAM, was developed to guide the selection and administration of universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations for the current statewide assessments, including summative assessments in mathematics, English language arts, and science, as well as social sciences, English language proficiency, the Oregon Extended Assessments, and the kindergarten assessment. Only those supports included in the OAM may be provided to students during the administration of Oregon's statewide assessments. When selecting an accessibility support for testing, keep in mind that they must mirror the supports currently being provided to that student in the classroom for instruction and assessments. It's never appropriate to introduce a support to a student for the first time during statewide testing. It is important to know the differences between each tier of statewide assessment accessibility supports. Specifically, there are 3 tiers of support: universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. Each of the 3 tiers of support have different rules for implementation. Universal tools are automatically available to all students and can be student selected. Designated supports are set and tied by test administrators and are available to any student based upon identified need. Accommodations are also set and tied by TAs and are available to students who have that support documented in their IEP or 504 plan. Within each of these tiers, any specific support may be embedded or incorporated into the testing interface, such as text-to-speech, or they may be non-embedded or outside of the testing interface, such as the use of scratch paper. For more details of each tier of support, consult Table 1.1 in the OAM. Modification is any practice or procedure that changes the construct being measured on an assessment, such as changes to the content, the level of cognitive demand, or the expected performance or outcome. Any support that is not listed in the OAM is considered a modification. Assessments taken under any modified condition are counted as non-participants in all federal and state accountability measures and reports. Having familiarized your student teams with the requirements associated with the use of the 3 tiers of accessibility supports, we turn our attention now to some of the practical tasks involved in the process, including the identification or selection, administration, and evaluation of accessibility supports. For those purposes, we recommend that teams consult the Council of Chief State School Officers Accessibility Manual, specifically Section 3 and the Tools section. As part of the identification of accessibility supports process, ODE highly recommends using the sample tests to familiarize TAs and students to the assessments and accessibility supports. In order to enable any available embedded support in a sample test, a proctored test session will need to be set up. For directions about how to set up a proctored sample assessment, consult the Online Test Administrator User Guide. Please note that it is never appropriate to initiate an operational assessment for this purpose. CCSSO's Accessibility Manual contains assistance in identifying or selecting various types of accessibility supports for students, including consideration of at least 3 factors: student characteristics such as disability, language proficiency, accessibility supports used in classroom instruction or assessments to access and perform in academic standards and state assessments, as well as classroom instruction and assessment tasks that include knowledge about what tasks are required in instruction and on state assessments, and ways to remove physical and other barriers to a student's ability to perform those tasks. And finally, accessibility policy. Accessibility policies for assessments or for part of an assessment and the consequences of those decisions must be well understood. It's also advised that practitioners consider the accessibility supports interactions for each student because the impact of combinations of supports can be conflicting. Having identified the accessibility supports that each student needs, the next step is to ensure that these supports are documented according to federal and/or state requirements. For example, in the Documenting Accessibility Supports section of a student's IEP, there are potentially 3 areas in which accessibility supports can be addressed. First, within the Consideration of Special Factors section, 614D3B, this is where communication and assistive technology supports are considered. Second, within the Supplementary Aids and Services section, 60233 and section 614D1AI. This area of the IEP includes aids, services, and other supports that are provided in regular education classes or other education-related settings to enable children with disabilities to be educated with non-disabled children to the maximum extent appropriate. Finally, and most relevant to our purposes, the Participation in Assessment section 612A16. This section of the IEP documents the accommodations needed to facilitate the participation of students with disabilities in general state and district-wide assessments. For accessibility supports to be used during administration of an Oregon statewide assessment, the support must be previously approved by the Accessibility Panel, listed in the appropriate test-specific accessibility supports tables in the OAM, implemented during instruction, and familiar to the student prior to testing. Once decisions have been made about providing accessibility supports to meet individual student needs, the logistics of providing the actual accessibility supports during state assessments must be mapped out. With the move to providing assessments on technology-based platforms, educators must make sure that students have opportunities to become familiar with the technological aspects of the assessment process. Prior to the day of an assessment, teachers should ensure that test administrators know what accessibility supports each student will be using and how to administer them properly. Adherence to guidelines detailing instructions and procedures for the administration of accessibility supports is necessary to ensure that test results reflect actual student knowledge. Test security involves maintaining the confidentiality of test questions and answers and is critical to ensuring the integrity of test and the validity of test results. Test security expectations thus remain intact for administration of accessibility supports. There are multiple reasons to evaluate the use of accessibility supports. Collecting and analyzing data on the use and effectiveness of supports ensures the meaningful participation of students with disabilities in statewide assessments. Data on the use and impact of those supports during assessments may reveal patterns of use that can inform future decision-making. An evaluation may also indicate areas in which the IEP team, Section 504 Plan Committee, or test administrators need additional training and support. In order to identify systemic patterns, districts may decide to gather information on the implementation of supports during assessment from all schools. Finally, observations conducted during test administration, such as interviews with TAs or students after testing sessions, may yield information that can be used to guide future evaluation processes. Finally, the links to the resources listed on previous slides are provided here. This concludes the Accessibility Support Training module.